My name is Margaret Santos, I'm 54 years old, and I've been working as a housekeeper for wealthy families for over 30 years. What I'm about to tell you is the most extraordinary story of my career, how one moment of underestimation from an arrogant millionaire not only changed my life forever, but taught both of us lessons about intelligence, respect, and the danger of judging people by their circumstances rather than their capabilities. This story begins in the spring of 2019, when I was hired to work for Alexander Blackwood, a tech billionaire who had made his fortune developing artificial intelligence software for major corporations. At 42 years old, Alexander was worth approximately $2.8 billion, owned homes in 5 countries, and had a reputation for being both brilliant and insufferably arrogant. Margaret, said Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, the employment agency director who had been placing me with families for 15 years, this position pays exceptionally well, but I need to warn you about Mr. Blackwood. What kind of warning? He's difficult. Very demanding, extremely particular about his routines, and he has a tendency to treat household staff as if they're invisible. He goes through housekeepers quickly. How quickly? The longest anyone has lasted in the past. 3 years is 8 months. Why do they leave? Various reasons. Some say he's condescending, others say he makes impossible demands, and a few have mentioned that he seems to enjoy making people feel inferior. Despite the warnings, I needed the job. My husband Carlos had been battling cancer for 2 years, and the medical bills were overwhelming our savings. The salary Alexander Blackwood was offering, $85,000 per year, was more than double what I typically earned. I'll take it, I told Mrs. Hendricks. Margaret, are you sure? I have other positions available that might be more comfortable. Mrs. Hendricks, I've been cleaning houses and caring for families for 30 years. I've dealt with difficult people before. I can handle Mr. Blackwood. 2 days later, I arrived at the Blackwood mansion in Beverly Hills for my first day of work. The house was extraordinary, a modern architectural masterpiece worth approximately $15 million, with floor-to-ceiling windows, imported marble floors, and technology integrated into every surface. You must be Margaret, said a voice behind me as I stood in the grand foyer, taking in the opulence. I turned to see Alexander Blackwood himself, tall, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit despite being at home at 7 a.m., with sharp features and eyes that seemed to appraise everything around him as either useful or worthless. Yes, sir. I'm Margaret Santos. Good. Let me be clear about expectations from the beginning. His tone was businesslike, with no warmth whatsoever. I maintain very specific standards for my home. Everything must be perfect, always. I don't tolerate mistakes, and I don't tolerate excuses. I understand, sir. I doubt you do, but you'll learn quickly or you'll be replaced. He handed me a tablet computer. All my preferences, schedules, and requirements are detailed in here. Study it thoroughly. Yes, sir. I work from my home office most days. When I'm working, I'm not to be disturbed unless the house is on fire. Literally on fire. Is that clear? Crystal clear, sir. Good. Your primary responsibility is maintaining the cleanliness and organization of this house to my exact specifications. Secondary responsibilities include meal preparation when my chef is unavailable, managing household supplies, and coordinating with maintenance services. Understood. One more thing, Margaret. He looked at me with what I can only describe as condescension. I've gone through 17 housekeepers in the past 3 years. The reason isn't that I'm difficult, it's that most people lack the intelligence and dedication required to meet my standards. Do you think you're different? I think I'm very good at my job, sir. We'll see. For the first 3 months, I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. Alexander's standards weren't just high, they were obsessive. Every surface had to be spotless, every object positioned exactly as specified in his detailed instructions. Every meal prepared to precise specifications, but gradually, I began to understand his routines and preferences. I learned that he liked his coffee at exactly 185 degrees Fahrenheit, that he required complete silence in the house between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. when he was working, and that he became genuinely agitated if anything in his environment was even slightly out of place. Margaret, he said one morning in June, finding me organizing his home library according to his complex filing system, you've lasted longer than most. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Longevity isn't the same as competence. But I could tell he was beginning to recognize my capabilities. The house ran more smoothly than it had in years. I anticipated his needs before he expressed them, and I had even streamlined some of his household systems to be more efficient. What Alexander didn't know was that I had a secret, one that would soon become very relevant to our relationship. Before becoming a housekeeper, I had been a mathematics professor at a small college in El Salvador. I had earned my PhD in applied mathematics from the University of Guatemala in 1987, specializing in algorithmic problem-solving and computational theory. But when Carlos and I immigrated to the United States in 1991, my foreign credentials weren't recognized, and we needed income immediately. Teaching positions require American certification, the university administrator had told me back then. You'd need to repeat several years of coursework and complete additional requirements. How long would that take? 3 to 5 years, depending on the program. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you need to support your family however you can. So I had taken the first job available, housekeeping for a wealthy family in Santa Monica. The work was honest and paid well enough, but I often felt like I was using only a small fraction of my intellectual capabilities. Over the years, I had occasionally considered returning to academia, but life had a way of creating obligations and circumstances that made it seem impossible. Carlos's business struggled, we had mortgages and responsibilities, and eventually, the idea of being Professor Santos again seemed like a dream from another lifetime. Now, at 54, cleaning the house of a tech billionaire who created algorithms for a living, the irony wasn't lost on me. Alexander, for his part, seemed to view me exactly as he viewed all household staff, as essentially invisible labor. He spoke to me only when necessary, never asked about my background or interests, and clearly assumed that my only capabilities were related to cleaning and organizing. Margaret, he would say, the marble in the main bathroom has water spots. I'll take care of it immediately, sir. Margaret, the temperature in the wine cellar is 1 degree off. I'll contact the maintenance service, sir. Margaret, I'm having 12 people for dinner tomorrow night. I'll need everything perfect. Of course, sir. I'll coordinate with your chef. Our interactions were purely transactional. To Alexander, I was a service provider, nothing more. He had no curiosity about who I was as a person, what my life was like outside his mansion, or what experiences and knowledge I might possess. This dynamic continued for months, until one afternoon. In September, when something happened that would change everything. I was cleaning Alexander's home office, a spectacular room filled with multiple monitors, high-end computers, and whiteboards covered with complex diagrams and mathematical equations. Alexander typically worked in his main office building downtown, but that day he was working from home, taking conference calls with investors and reviewing technical documents. Margaret, he said as I was dusting his desk, I'll be working late tonight. Don't worry about dinner, I'll order something. Yes, sir. As I moved around his office, I couldn't help but notice the mathematical formulas covering his whiteboards. They were related to machine learning algorithms and neural network optimization, areas I had studied extensively during my academic career. Interesting approach to the gradient descent optimization, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. Alexander looked up from his computer with surprise. What did you say? Nothing, sir. I was just thinking aloud. No, what did you say about gradient descent? I felt my face flush. I had spoken without thinking, and now I was in an awkward position. I just noticed the equations on your whiteboard, sir. They remind me of some optimization problems I used to work on. Alexander stared at me as if I had just spoken in an alien language. You recognize those equations? Yes, sir. They appear to be related to neural network training algorithms. Margaret, how do you know anything about neural networks? I used to be a mathematics professor, sir, before I started working as a housekeeper. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander continued staring at me, clearly trying to process this information. You were a mathematics professor? Yes, sir. I have a PhD in applied mathematics from the University of Guatemala. And you're working as my housekeeper? Yes, sir. Why? It was a complicated question with a complicated answer. How do you explain to someone who has always had access to opportunity that sometimes circumstances force intelligent, educated people into situations that don't reflect their capabilities? When my husband and I immigrated to the United States, my credentials weren't recognized here. We needed income immediately, and housekeeping provided that. Over time, other responsibilities made it difficult to pursue certification for teaching. Alexander was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing this revelation. Margaret, what's your assessment of the algorithm I'm working on? I looked more carefully at his whiteboards. The mathematics were indeed complex, but I could see several areas where the approach could be optimized. It's sophisticated work, sir. But if you don't mind me saying, there might be a more efficient approach to the convergence problem you're trying to solve. Show me. For the next hour, I found myself standing at Alexander Blackwood's whiteboard, explaining alternative mathematical approaches to problems that had been puzzling his team of PhD engineers for weeks, and for the first time since I'd started working for him. Alexander Blackwood looked at me not as his housekeeper, but as an equal. That evening marked the beginning of a completely different relationship, one that would soon lead to a challenge that would change both our lives forever. The morning after our unexpected mathematical discussion, Alexander's entire demeanor toward me had shifted. When I arrived at work, instead of his usual curt greeting, he was waiting for me in his office with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. "Margaret," he said as I entered with my cleaning supplies, "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday." "Yes, sir? I want to understand something. You said you were a mathematics professor. What specifically was your area of expertise?" "Algorithmic problem solving and computational theory, sir. I specialized in optimization problems, finding the most efficient solutions to complex mathematical challenges." "And you gave that up to become a housekeeper?" I set down my cleaning supplies and faced him directly. For the first time in our professional relationship, it felt like he was actually seeing me as a person. "I didn't give it up by choice, sir. Sometimes life circumstances force you to prioritize survival over passion. But you've maintained your knowledge all these years? Mathematics doesn't leave you, sir. It's like speaking a language. Once you're fluent, you remain fluent even if you don't use it professionally." Alexander walked to his whiteboard, which still contained the equations we had worked on the previous day. "Margaret, I need to ask you something directly. Yesterday, you suggested modifications to an algorithm that my team of MIT and Stanford graduates has been struggling with for 3 months. How is that possible?" "Sometimes fresh perspective helps, sir. Your team might be too close to the problem to see alternative approaches." Or, Alexander said, with the first hint of a smile I had ever seen from him, "I might have one of the most brilliant mathematical minds in the country cleaning my house without realizing it. I'm just a housekeeper, sir." "No, Margaret. You're a mathematician who happens to be working as a housekeeper. There's a significant difference." Over the following days, our conversations continued to evolve. Alexander began asking my opinion on various technical challenges his company was facing, and I found myself engaging with complex mathematical concepts I hadn't discussed in decades. "Margaret," he said one afternoon, "I want to propose something unusual." "What kind of proposal, sir?" "I'd like you to sit in on a meeting with my development team tomorrow. We're facing a problem that has been consuming enormous resources, and I'm curious about your perspective." "Sir, I don't think that's appropriate. I'm your housekeeper. You're a PhD mathematician who happens to work as my housekeeper. I'd like to utilize your actual expertise." The next day, I found myself in the most surreal situation of my professional life, sitting in a conference room with 6 of the most brilliant software engineers in Silicon Valley, discussing artificial intelligence algorithms while still wearing my housekeeper's uniform. "This is Margaret," Alexander announced to his startled team. "She's going to be consulting on the neural network optimization problem." I could see the confusion and skepticism on their faces. Here was their billionaire boss introducing his domestic help as a technical consultant. "Alexander," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, his lead algorithm developer, "I'm not sure I understand. Margaret has a PhD in applied mathematics with a specialization in algorithmic optimization. I believe she might offer valuable insights on our current challenges." For the next 2 hours, I found myself deep in technical discussions about machine learning, data processing, and computational efficiency. It was exhilarating to use my mathematical training again, to engage with problems that required the full scope of my intellectual capabilities. "Margaret," said Dr. Walsh at the end of the meeting, "your suggestions about recursive optimization could potentially reduce our processing time by 30 to 40%. "Thank you, Dr. Walsh. Where did you complete your doctoral work?" "University of Guatemala, 1987. "And you've been working in technology since then?" I looked at Alexander, unsure how to answer. "Margaret has been pursuing other career paths," Alexander interjected. "But her mathematical expertise remains sharp." After the meeting, Alexander and I returned to his home office. "Margaret, I owe you an apology." "For what, sir?" "For treating you like you were invisible for 6 months. For making assumptions about your capabilities based on your job title rather than taking the time to know who you actually are." "You don't owe me any apology, sir. You hired me to be your housekeeper, and that's what I've been." "No, I hired you to be my housekeeper because I never bothered to discover that you could be much more valuable to me in a completely different capacity." Alexander sat behind his desk, looking thoughtful. "Margaret, I want to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" "I want to offer you a position as a senior algorithm consultant with my company. Starting salary would be $180,000 per year, plus benefits and stock options. I was stunned. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say yes. It's not that simple, sir. I don't have current certifications, I haven't worked in an academic or technical environment in decades, and I'm not sure I'm qualified for such a position. Margaret, yesterday you solved a problem that 6 PhD engineers couldn't solve in 3 months. You're more than qualified. I thought about Carlos, about our medical bills, about the life-changing opportunity Alexander was offering. Can I think about it? Of course. But Margaret, I want you to understand something. This isn't charity, and it's not guilt. This is business. You have knowledge and capabilities that could save my company millions of dollars and months of development time. I'd be a fool not to utilize that. That evening, I went home to our small apartment in Burbank and told Carlos about the extraordinary turn my day had taken. Marga, he said, using the nickname he called me for 30 years, are you seriously considering this? I don't know, Carlos. It's been so long since I worked as a mathematician. What if I'm not as sharp as I think I am? What if I embarrass myself? What if you don't? What if you're exactly as brilliant as you've always been, and this is your chance to finally use your gifts again? But what about the housekeeping job? What if the consulting position doesn't work out? Marga, you've been cleaning houses for wealthy people for 30 years. You could find another housekeeping job in a week. But this opportunity? This might never come again. 2 days later, I returned to Alexander with my answer. Sir, I appreciate your offer more than I can express. But I'd like to propose a modified arrangement. What kind of modification? Let me continue working as your housekeeper for now, but also take on consulting projects as needed. If my contributions prove valuable over time, we can discuss a permanent transition. Alexander considered this. You want to maintain both positions simultaneously? Yes, sir. It feels like a safer approach for everyone. Margaret, you realize you'd essentially be working 2 jobs. I've been working multiple jobs my entire adult life, sir. I can manage it. And you realize this arrangement would be highly unusual? Most valuable arrangements are unusual, sir. Alexander laughed, the first genuine laugh I had ever heard from him. All right, Margaret. We'll try your hybrid approach. But I want to add one condition. What condition? I want to test your capabilities with a challenge that has been frustrating me personally for months. What kind of challenge? Alexander walked to a safe in his office, removed a thick folder, and placed it on his desk. This contains a mathematical problem that I've been working on in my spare time. It's related to a new approach to quantum computing algorithms that could revolutionize the entire technology industry. What's the problem? I need to find a way to optimize quantum gate operations to reduce decoherence time while maintaining computational accuracy. The mathematical complexity is extraordinary. Alexander opened the folder, revealing dozens of pages covered with equations that made his neural network problems look simple by comparison. I've been working on this for 8 months, he continued. I've consulted with quantum physicists, hired mathematical consultants, and even reached out to professors at Caltech and MIT. No one has been able to solve it. I looked at the equations, feeling both intimidated and intrigued. What makes you think I might be able to solve something that has stumped quantum physics experts? Alexander smiled in a way that seemed almost mischievous. Because sometimes, the most complex problems require the simplest insights, and sometimes the experts are too invested in conventional approaches to see unconventional solutions. And if I can't solve it? Then nothing changes. You continue as my housekeeper consultant, and I continue working on the problem myself. And if I can solve it? Alexander's smile broadened. If you can solve this problem, Margaret, I'll double your consulting salary to $360,000 per year, give you a private office in my downtown building, and make you a senior partner in my quantum computing division. I stared at him. You're serious? Completely serious. But Margaret, I should warn you, this isn't just a difficult problem. According to every expert I've consulted, it might be mathematically impossible to solve with current knowledge. How long do I have? Take as long as you need. There's no deadline. Can I take the materials home to study? Of course. I gathered the folder, feeling the weight of both the mathematical challenge and the life-changing opportunity it represented. Alexander, I said, using his first name for the first time, why are you doing this? What do you mean? Why are you giving me this opportunity? You could hire anyone in the world to work on this problem. Alexander was quiet for a moment. Because, Margaret, for the past 6 months I've been surrounded by brilliant people who think exactly the way I think, who have the same educational backgrounds I have, who approach problems the same way I approach them. And despite all that collective brilliance, we keep hitting the same walls. And you think I'm different? I think you're different because your path to mathematical expertise was different. You've had to solve real-world problems in ways that academics never have. 2. You've had to be creative and resourceful in ways that people like me, who have always had access to unlimited resources, never learned to be. So you think my struggles might actually be an advantage? I think your experiences have given you a perspective that money can't buy and education can't teach. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Carlos, surrounded by pages of quantum computing equations that looked like hieroglyphics to anyone without advanced mathematical training. Marga, Carlos said, do you really think you can solve this? I don't know, I admitted. But I know I have to try. For the next 3 weeks, I immersed myself completely in the quantum computing problem. I worked on it during my breaks at Alexander's house, studied it every evening after dinner, and even dreamed about quantum gates and decoherence patterns. The mathematics were indeed extraordinarily complex, far more challenging than anything I had worked on during my academic career. But gradually, as I studied the problem from every angle, I began to see patterns that others might have missed. On a Thursday evening in October, 3 weeks after Alexander had given me the challenge, I was sitting at my kitchen table when something clicked. A connection between two seemingly unrelated aspects of the problem suddenly became clear, and I saw a potential solution that was both elegant and unconventional. I spent the rest of the night working through the calculations, checking and rechecking every step. By dawn, I was confident that I had not only solved Alexander's impossible problem, but had found a solution that was more efficient than anything he had hoped for. The next morning, I arrived at Alexander's house with a solution that would change both our lives forever. When I arrived at Alexander's house that Friday morning, October 18, 2019, I carried with me not just my usual cleaning supplies, but a manila envelope containing what I believed was the solution to his impossible quantum computing problem. My hands were actually trembling slightly, not from nervousness, but from excitement. After 3 weeks of intensive work, I had found an approach that was not only mathematically sound but elegantly simple in its core concept. Good morning, Margaret, Alexander said as I entered his office. He was already at his desk, surrounded by his usual array of monitors and technical documents. Good morning, Alexander. He looked up, noticing the envelope in my hands. Is that what I think it is? I believe I've solved your quantum computing problem. Alexander's expression shifted from polite interest to intense focus. Really? Show me. I opened the envelope and spread my work across his conference table, 15 pages of detailed mathematical calculations, diagrams, and explanations. Before I begin, I said, I want to explain my approach, because it's quite different from conventional quantum computing methodologies. I'm listening. Every expert you consulted approached this problem by trying to minimize decoherence time through increasingly complex quantum gate sequences. But I approached it from the opposite direction. What do you mean? Instead of fighting decoherence, I found a way to utilize it as part of the computational process itself. Alexander stood up and moved closer to the table, studying my calculations. That's theoretically impossible, Margaret. Decoherence is quantum computing's greatest enemy. It destroys the quantum states that make quantum computers more powerful than classical computers. That's the conventional wisdom, yes. But look at equation 7. I pointed to a particular section of my work where I had developed a new mathematical framework. I discovered that if you structure the quantum gates in this specific pattern, decoherence doesn't destroy the quantum states, it actually helps stabilize certain computational pathways while eliminating others. Alexander began reading through my calculations more carefully, his expression growing more intense with each page. Margaret, this mathematical framework, it's completely original. I've never seen anything like this approach. It occurred to me that everyone was treating decoherence as a problem to be solved, rather than as a natural phenomenon to be incorporated into the solution. Alexander continued studying my work, occasionally making notes or asking clarification questions. After about 30 minutes, he looked up at me with an expression I had never seen before, not just surprise, but something approaching awe. Margaret, if this actually works, you haven't just solved my problem. You've potentially revolutionized the entire field of quantum computing. Do you think it will work? I think. Alexander paused, looking back at my calculations. I think you've just accomplished something that the most brilliant quantum physicists in the world have been trying to do for decades. So what happens now? Now we test it. But Margaret, I need you to understand the implications of what you've done here. What implications? Alexander sat down across from me, his demeanor completely serious. If your solution works, it could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars in technological applications. Quantum computers using this approach could be exponentially more powerful and stable than anything currently existing. I just tried to solve the mathematical problem you gave me. And in doing so, you may have just made one of the most important technological breakthroughs of the 21st century. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Alexander brought in his top technical team to review my work, consulted with quantum physics experts from Stanford and Caltech, and arranged for initial testing of my theoretical framework. "Margaret," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh after reviewing my calculations, "I have to ask, where did you develop this approach? I've never seen this mathematical methodology in any published research." "I developed it myself, Dr. Walsh. It occurred to me during my work on this problem." "You just invented a new approach to quantum computing mathematics?" "I suppose so." Dr. Walsh looked at Alexander with something approaching disbelief. "Alexander, do you realize what you have here?" "I'm beginning to." 3 weeks later, preliminary testing confirmed that my theoretical framework was not only correct, but performed even better than my calculations had predicted. "Margaret," Alexander said when he called me into his office with the test results, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For underestimating what was possible. When I gave you this challenge, I honestly didn't expect you to solve it. I thought it would be an interesting exercise that might lead to some insights, but I never imagined you would actually crack a problem that has been considered impossible." "So what happens now?" Alexander smiled, not his usual polite business smile, but a genuine expression of joy and excitement. "Now, Margaret, everything changes. For both of us." "What do you mean?" "I mean that your solution is going to make us both very wealthy, and it's going to establish you as one of the most important mathematical minds in the technology industry." "I'm still not sure I understand." "Margaret, I'm offering you a full partnership in a new quantum computing company that we're going to build around your discovery. Not just employment, ownership. Equal partnership." I stared at him. "Equal partnership?" "Your mathematics, my business infrastructure and capital. 50-50 ownership of what could become one of the most valuable technology companies in the world." "Alexander, I don't know anything about running a technology company." "You don't need to. I know business, you know the mathematics that's going to drive the business. Together, we can accomplish something extraordinary." I thought about Carlos, about our modest apartment, about the 30 years I had spent cleaning houses while my mathematical knowledge lay dormant. "Can I discuss this with my husband?" "Of course. But Margaret, I want you to understand something else." "What?" "This opportunity exists because you never lost your intellectual curiosity, because you continued to think like a mathematician even when the world treated you like you were just a housekeeper, and because you had the courage to approach an impossible problem from a completely original perspective." "I just tried to solve the problem you gave me." "No, Margaret. You did something much more important than that. You proved that brilliance and wisdom can come from the most unexpected places, and that the greatest innovations often come from people who think differently because they've lived differently." That evening, I sat with Carlos in our small kitchen, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. "Marga," he said, "do you realize what this means?" "It means our lives are about to change completely." "It means more than that. It means that all those years of struggle, all those times when you felt like your education was being wasted, all those moments when you wondered if you should have made different choices, it all led to this moment. What if I'm not ready for this kind of responsibility? What if you are? What if this is exactly what you were meant to do, and it just took 30 years for the right opportunity to present itself?" 6 months later, Santos Blackwood Quantum Technologies was officially launched, with me as Chief Mathematical Officer, and Alexander as CEO. Our first major contract, worth $280 million, was with a government agency developing next-generation encryption systems, but the most satisfying moment came on our official launch day, when Alexander addressed the technology industry press conference announcing our company. "I want to tell you how Santos Blackwood Quantum Technologies began," he said to the assembled reporters and industry executives. 6 months ago, I gave what I thought was an impossible mathematical challenge to someone I had completely underestimated. I laughed when I presented the problem, assuming it would be an interesting exercise but nothing more. Alexander paused, looking directly at me where I sat in the front row. That person was my housekeeper, Dr. Margaret Santos, who has a PhD in applied mathematics and who solved a problem that quantum physics experts had deemed impossible. Her solution didn't just answer my challenge, it revolutionized our understanding of quantum computing itself. He continued, "Margaret's story reminds us that brilliance exists everywhere, often in places we don't think to look. It reminds us that when we judge people by their circumstances rather than their capabilities, we miss opportunities to discover extraordinary talent. The truth is, when I laughed and said, "Solve this and I'll double your salary," I never imagined that the solution would be so revolutionary that doubling a housekeeper's salary would be completely inadequate compensation. Instead, I found myself offering equal partnership in what has become one of the most promising technology ventures of the decade. After the press conference, Alexander and I stood together looking out at the Los Angeles skyline from our new office building. "Margaret," he said, "do you ever think about how different things would be if I had continued to see you only as my housekeeper?" "All the time," I replied. "But I also think about how different things would be if I had allowed myself to believe that cleaning houses was all I was capable of." "What do you mean?" "I mean that your mistake was underestimating me based on my job title. But my potential mistake would have been underestimating myself based on my circumstances." "And what prevented that mistake?" "The knowledge that intelligence, creativity, and problem-solving ability don't disappear just because life forces you into situations that don't utilize them. They wait, quietly, for the right opportunity. And when that opportunity comes? When it comes, you have to be ready to prove that you're more than what people assume you are." Today, 3 years later, Santos BLACKWOOD Quantum Technologies is valued at over $2 billion. But more importantly, we've implemented programs to identify and develop mathematical and scientific talent in unconventional places, among restaurant workers, custodial staff, retail employees, and others whose educational backgrounds might never be discovered through traditional recruitment channels. "You know," Alexander said to me recently, "the day I challenged you to solve that quantum computing problem, I thought I was testing your capabilities." "Weren't you?" "No, Margaret. I was actually testing my own ability to recognize brilliance when it doesn't come packaged the way I expected it to." "And what did you learn?" "I learned that the most valuable discoveries often come from the most unexpected sources, and that the greatest mistake any leader can make is assuming they know everything about the people around them." The truth is, Alexander's challenge didn't just change my life, it changed his understanding of intelligence, value, and the importance of looking beyond surface assumptions to discover the extraordinary capabilities that exist in ordinary circumstances. And sometimes, the most life-changing moments begin with someone laughing at what they think is impossible, only to discover that they've been looking at the solution all along. The END warning disclaimer: this story is completely fictional and created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental.